Hello and welcome. My name's Mary Woodthorpe, and I've been English paper piecing now for probably 5-6 years, compulsively. It's a wonderful, wonderful hobby because I'm able to take it with me anywhere. This was the very first thing that I ever made when I paper pieced. It's just a really simple square, and I have used it ever since as a pincushion. Well, I'm going to show you some quick techniques today just to get you started. But I have a video series coming up soon that will give you a lot more detail and a lot more information on all the wonderful things that are available when you paper piece. What is English paper piecing? Well, it's a method of joining small pieces of fabric together using a paper template to keep it into perfect shape. You stitch it together and you sew these templates that are covered with fabric, and you sew them together to make a larger piece of fabric, as big as you want it, for whatever reason you want it. So it's a fantastic method of taking scraps of fabric, putting them together, and making something really useful. Now, the beauty of English paper piecing is that you really don't need a tremendous amount of equipment. You can get started with the very, very minimal outlay. You're going to need 2 needles. You're going to need some thread. The first one is going to be used for stitching the fabric to the card, and if you can see this, it's in a nice contrasting thread colour, so I often use red or something that needs using up. For sewing the units together, you're going to need a thread that blends very well with the colour that you've got in the fabric. I like to have on standby 3 shades of grey, which are very, very useful for blending in. A light, medium and a darker colour. And if you use white thread, it's only really suitable for very light fabrics because it can show very much, even if you use very tiny stitches. What you're going to need to get started for English paper piecing is you're going to need some paper or light card, which is best, because remember, you're actually going to have to stitch through it, so you don't want it to be too stiff. And even this light piece of paper is fine if you've got a light piece of fabric. If your fabric is a lot thicker, then you're going to need something a little bit more substantial. So you're going to need some paper, you're going to need a template for the shape that you're going to use, you're going to need 2 sewing needles. One is going to be used for just sewing the fabric to the card, and I would say 2 needles because that can get quite blunt when you're often going through card, and you need a very sharp fine needle like an applique needle or something a little bit longer for actually stitching the 2 sections together. So 2 needles. You will need 2 pairs of scissors. One is for cutting out the paper templates. You never want to mix fabric cutting scissors with paper cutting scissors because paper always blunts scissors much faster. So I don't know if you can see this, but I've got the remnants of saying paper on this pair of scissors. And on this one I've got a little green tag which says good on there, which shows me that actually that is the pair I use for my fabric. I have a 3rd pair of scissors which I use for travelling around with, and these I just use because they're small and handy for cutting thread. The other thing you're going to need is you're going to need some thread, a darker coloured one or a contrasting coloured thread for stitching and tacking the fabric to the paper, and you're going to need another blending thread such as a grey or something that matches the fabric to stitch the sections together so you can't see the thread. That's pretty much all you're going to need. You're going to need a few pins. If you're doing quite fine fabric, I would recommend that you have the very tiny pins, but if you've got bigger pieces that are more substantial, then the pin that's got a nice big top on the end is much easier to handle. One of the most important things about English paper piecing is having a really accurate template. If you don't have a very precisely cut, beautifully finished template to fold your fabric round, unfortunately all the rest of your work will not look as sharp and as clear as it could do. Now, if you follow the link on my site, I've got a connection where you can print off any size template that you like, whether it's hexagons, whether it's diamonds for tumbling blocks, octagons, whatever you want that's on that site, and you can have them printed exactly the same size as you require. The only proviso I put with that is make sure that you print off enough at one time, or get several together and fill a complete piece of paper and print them all off in your printer at the same time, because when you print them off at different pieces of equipment and at different times, they can actually come out fractionally different sizing, and you don't want to do that when you're working on an important large piece. Over the corners, you're going to work your way around the whole piece, folding one corner after the other until you reach the end, and you will have completed your piece.